This is the build I'm currently using for the Ramparts Incursion on Nightmare 4. I play this map in a group, and I do not recommend soloing it as it is a fairly hard map. For builders, you will need a Walling Squire, a Frosty Apprentice, a Trapping Huntress with Elemental Chaos Uber, and semi-optionally a Monk for an Aura. I also like to have 4 DPS, so everyone brings a DPS to the table. Either 2 DPS Apprentices and 2 DPS Huntresses, or DPS Apprentice, Tank Squire, and 2 DPS Huntresses. And I'll go into what variations I use at the end of the map, the end of the video. So to get started, I'll explain what makes this incursion unique. And the biggest difference from a normal map is that it has these purple healing circles. These will heal the mobs a significant amount, and it is near impossible to out DPS them, so you have to build around them. They spawn in the same place every map, and they spawn in certain positions each wave. On the first wave, this one always spawns right here. On wave 2, you'll have 2 spawn. One will spawn back in this corner here, and one will spawn a little bit further up compared to the other one right here. On waves 3 and 4, I forget the exact order, but you'll have, I believe on wave 3, one will spawn here, and one will spawn here, and then on wave 4 you'll get one here and one right here. So it mirrors each other each wave. And I could be wrong, it could be, as I said, this could be on wave 3 and that could be on wave 4. I don't quite remember, but it really doesn't make too much of a difference. And finally you have Malthius, the boss. On waves 1 through 4, Malthius will always spawn magical resist skeletons. The magic resist is constant across maps, so that's something you need to take into account. And I'll go into that later. And finally, on wave 5, Malthius himself will spawn. He won't spawn skeletons, but he always spawns as physical resist. And when he actually spawns, the other healing auras go away. So it's worth keeping in mind that while it's magical now, it will be physical later, and that's how it will always be. So that's kind of how it goes as just the general over picture. I personally like to, when I'm setting this map up, I like to make sure I have a double resistance on mid-left and mid-right. So in this case, I have double physical resist. Either double physical or double magical. I don't want neutral or physical magical here. And I'm not talking about Malthius at all. Because when you have double resistance mid, that means your left will be magic and your right will generally be magic neutral in this case. Or it could be magic with neutral over on the left side. This makes it so that you can put 2 DPS Apprentices middle and 2 DPS Huntresses on the sides. You can kind of combine forces that way. Versus if you have a neutral in middle, you're pretty much guaranteed on the right side to have physical neutral, and one hero cannot successfully DPS that themselves. It's still manageable, but it's not quite ideal. So if you can get double resistance mid, that's perfect. I'm not sure which I prefer yet. I think I prefer double magical mid, but I've done it both ways, and I'll go into later on why I kind of like double magical mid more. Now to get started with the actual build, I'll start over here on the left, starting with walls. I'll place one here. I've also seen people place a little bit further back to about here. If this doesn't work so well for you, go ahead and try that. But that generally works pretty well for me. One here, another here. So these stay a little bit off the wall. I've never had anything slip by on the sides here. So just kind of put them more towards the center. Another one right here. And your final one goes at the top of this first step right here. The healing aura in this will butt up right against the back of this pretty much. So you don't want to have it too far down so that you make sure no mobs ever clip that healing aura. Now we'll switch to Frosty Apprentice. Each lane will get 3 Frosty Towers. Put the first one on the box with a map on it. The second one on this big box here. And the final one on this barrel. You have to be a little careful because with that third one, you don't quite reach as far to the left as I would generally like, but it still works just fine there. Here you have to be careful with how close you place these to this barricade, as on wave 3 there is an ogre. The ogre always spawns here on wave 3, so if you put them too close to the barricade, the ogre will stomp on them and destroy them. You don't want to put them behind here as you won't have enough range unless you have Vector Corrector on your helmet. And I'm not entirely sure Vector Corrector on the helmet is working as intended, so I would try and just use that positioning. Now for here, you always have to place the one on this banister first, and then one on this bench. If you place it on the bench first, you can't place the one behind it. I'll do the same across right here. And always making sure that the left side of this targeting vector lines up with this wall. And then I put the final two in the very middle back a little bit. Now the point of this is, I've had some weird things happen where a kobold runs from left up here and explodes. By putting these two in the middle, it stops that kobold from either taking out an entire group of 3 here. It should just generally take out either the 2 in the middle or maybe the one right here and the one right here, depending exactly how it explodes. And also, if you have a flying kobold slip through middle, because you don't have very much time to DPS them, that flying kobold should only take out 1 set of Frosties. And finally, we'll do the last lane over here. I put my first one on this railing, aiming so that it kind of aims as far down as possible in there. The second one I do not put on the railing, as if you put it too close on this railing here, it always would die on me pretty much every wave. I think I tested it 3 rounds in a row, and it died each wave, so I've changed position. And this final one gets a little farther to the left in there, but is far enough away from the wall that it won't die either. I think it was kobolds that was exploding on this wall that was taking out the ones that I would place right here. Now we will switch over to traps. I will start with the magical traps for the explosive traps for the magic lanes. Each lane that isn't in the middle will get 6 traps. And this final trap, I try and make sure, this might even be a little bit high up, I try and place behind a line that kind of extends out from that little notch there, as you don't want this trap to be in the healing aura. It spawns right there. Now I'll go over to the other magical lane over here. Oh, sorry, it was showing weird for me. Here it is. Once again, 6 traps. Because this one up here is neutral, I'm going to switch to physical. What I use for physical, that is the elemental chaos. I prefer elemental chaos for the neutral lanes. I put the second trap on this final tail on this raised portion, and the third kind of goes behind this shadow. If you put it too far out, there is a healing aura that spawns right here, and I want to, as I said, keep this out of the healing aura. You might need to move this a little bit. I forget the exact positioning, but I kind of generally connect that red dot with this shadow to avoid placing it past that. Now finally, in the middle, this is where there's a lot of variation in this build. In each build, no matter what resistance you have mid, I will do 5 traps that follow this path. And the one right over here, this one tries to get books. Sometimes the books kind of spawn and go to weird positions, so you might want to take note of that and adjust that position as needed if it doesn't work for you. Again, another 5 over here, one out here. Now this is where you have exactly 40 DU left over, and there are a number of things you can do. Because this is magic resist for these skeletons, and you'll presumably be using DPS Apprentices up here, you're going to have no real DPS on these skeletons. It's going to take a very long time for them to kill them. So I'll switch over and show you first one variation on what I've been doing. And that's I put 1 explosive trap here and 1 explosive trap here. This is if I'm using double apprentice. This way, when the skeletons spawn, they'll immediately take damage, and when they get up on the wall here, they'll die as well. I originally was using 2 traps back here, but this wasn't killing them fast enough, so they would still just end up bunching on the wall. So I switched to this split trap here. An alternative option is, if you're using a monk, and using particularly a tank, like a Squire, I put a Serenity Aura up here with that 1 trap on the wall. This isn't necessary. I mean, if you have Purge Evil, this is pretty good too, because it will damage quite a few things with the Purge Evil Explosion, and make it a little easier for you to retrieve mana and stay alive up here, as this is the hardest lane. And finally, because this is so hard, actually, when I get double magical up here on the sides, I'll still stay on my monk, and I'll put a boost aura here to get these walls. Positioning would be a little bit farther out, obviously, but I would get these walls. Did not mean to sell that trap. I would sell this so that I get it right, get as many traps as I can, and boost these walls. On wave 5 it gets very difficult, and I'll explain that in a bit. When I only tend to do this boost when it's magical, but I'm leaning more towards doing it when it's physical too. Yes, the skeletons will stay alive a lot longer, but as I really want to stress it takes a beating up here. Even with my fairly high walls, I don't have my boost blockade sphere on right now, so this is what they are, base, not boosted. We lose them still fairly frequently up here. That's why I generally like to have 2 people repairing up here and DPSing, but I've done this solo. It's just a lot more difficult. I've solo done this area, but since then I've kind of moved to 2 people up here. And finally, because Malthius becomes magical resist, sometimes on wave 5 physical resist. On wave 5 I'll put 2 explosive traps there right under him. But I've had more success with keeping this boost up and just DPSing him down with apprentices and letting him live a while. I will say that if you use the build where you use an explosive trap here and a serenity door, or 2 explosive traps out here, or an explosive trap here and here, make sure to sell those explosive traps and put 2 elemental chaos traps up here. So that's pretty much the actual build. Now I'm going to explain kind of some more quirks of this. As I said earlier, on wave 3 you will always have an ogre that spawns in the right lane. That makes this lane generally the second hardest, as sometimes this can be overwhelmed here. The ogre will sometimes walk around the wall, come around down below like this. It's happened to be twice in at least 10 different runs. So I think it has to do with people getting too close to aggroing the ogre, and he kind of walks around, but I'm not entirely sure. So just be aware that's actually never ended the game. We've been able to adjust and DPS him effectively enough that it hasn't been an issue, but just know that that could happen. Part of the reason why these Frosty Towers are here rather than over there is so that if the ogre does get around, he'll aggro those and it'll give you more time to kill him rather than him running over there and killing the objectives. And also on wave 5 you will get double ogre mid. You're guaranteed to get double ogre mid plus Malthius. So that's part of the reason what makes mid so hard and why I like a boost story here. I'm not sure if the ogres take the resistances, but I believe that they do not, but don't quote me on that. And finally, let's go over the anti-air. You'll be using your DPS Huntresses for the air on this. I don't use any AA towers. The air can spawn in 4 spots. The first spot is over here on the left. Then there are 2 middle on mid-left and mid-right. And finally, I believe on the right side they spawn on the right side of the castle over there someplace. You don't have very much time to react middle, so you need to be on top of this. The Huntress should be focusing air. At least one Huntress should be focusing air every wave when it spawns. Make sure the Huntresses rotate, especially for Flying Kobolds. The Flying Kobold has screwed us up a couple of times on this map. The air will spawn one of the 4 on wave 2, and it'll stay that way for wave 3. And then on wave 4, a second lane will open, and you'll have air for wave 4 and 5 out of 2 lanes. So you are given a break kind of on air for the first 3 waves, but air gets a little difficult on waves 4 and 5. And finally, I'll go over where you want to place your heroes. With this setup currently, you would put a DPS Huntress on right and left, and 2 DPS Apprentices in the middle, or a DPS Apprentice and a Tank Squire could be pretty effective too in middle. Just depends on what you need. Middle is pretty hard to DPS, so just be careful when you're here. If you have double magical resist mid, put your 2 Huntresses up here, put 1 DPS Apprentice over there, and 1 DPS Apprentice over there. When it's double magical mid, I don't like using the Squire because you need those 2 Huntresses to kind of worry about the air. Although one can do the air himself, you still want to be able to have 1 Huntress as backup if the air Huntress dies or something happens, or the air is too split. And finally, I will go over what kind of makes this map to some degree desirable, and is that Malthius will drop a special weapon. I only have the special weapon for the Huntress, and that is the Armored Cleanser. Its special passive is Breaker, and this reduces target's resistance by -20 on hit. I've seen this bow, my friend got one where it was -19 and a 4S instead of 1S. I will say I don't think this bow is probably very good, particularly because the shot is awful. As you can see, well, that's not a very good view. Let's try here. As you can see here, the shot drops a lot. And it doesn't do as much damage as a burst bow in my experience. So it's kind of a neat bow to have. It used to be better in the past, as I understand it, and then it got nerfed. But maybe in the future it'll get buffed, so it might be worth farming one or just something different to do. I've heard that the other ones can drop for other heroes, but I've never seen them. It was in the past that you could get one for each hero. I've been trying to get the Apprentice one with no luck thus far. And as far as I can tell, it only drops off Malthus. And that pretty much wraps up this video, guys. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them and I'll get back to you.